Shiny Pokemon are the rarest thing to encounter in a Pokemon game. They're so rare in fact that some people have never seen one. In this video, I'm going to be telling you the easiest shiny Pokemon in every game so you can get some shinies. Also, event Pokemon do not count for this list because they just involve typing a code in. Starting out with Pokemon Red and Blue, and these games are kind of weird. If you know anything about Red, Blue, and Yellow, you would know that there are no shinies at all. This was due to the black and white graphics on the Game Boy, so shiny Pokemon could not exist. However, Generation 2 did have shinies, and you could trade over Kanto Pokemon to a copy of Gold, Silver, or Crystal, which has shinies. So the question is, how do you get them? Well, it's very simple. In this generation, IVs or individual values determine shininess. So basically find the right Pokemon with the right IVs, which the odds are 1 in 8,192. Also, some Pokemon, like the Cave Pokemon, already have a decided set of IVs, so they will never be shiny. Now, there's actually a glitch to get perfect IVs that I'll be explaining right now. I debated putting glitches in this video, but I decided it would be fine. The first part of this glitch is having a Pokemon with those right IVs like I mentioned before. The first step in doing this is trading over a shiny Pokemon from Generation 2. The easiest shiny to do this with is the shiny Gyarados, which is a guaranteed shiny. The second component for this glitch is having that shiny Pokemon know a move called Mimic. Mimic copies a move from the target. The user will retain the copied move in Mimic's place until the user faints or is switched out, or the battle ends. You would then find a wild Ditto and transform with Mimic. This would teach your Gyarados the move Transform, meaning it can transform into the Ditto for the duration of the battle. Since Ditto only knows Transform, it'll transform into the shiny Gyarados. Now, here's the interesting part. Since we sketched Mimic from the Ditto, Ditto can go for Transform a second time because it copies our moveset. Due to a programming mistake, Ditto not only copies the moveset stats and attributes of the Gyarados, but it also copies the IVs. This means it has the right IVs to be shiny and will therefore be shiny when transformed to a Generation 2 game. This method is a bit hard because it does require 2 Pokemon games, 2 Game Boys, and a link cable, but is the easiest shiny Pokemon in the Generation 1 games. Speaking of Generation 2, this one's actually pretty easy. There are no glitches, but multiple Pokemon can be counted as the easiest shiny. The first one is the Guaranteed Shiny Gyarados in the Lake of Rage. However, I don't really count Guaranteed Shiny Pokemon as the easiest shiny, so there are definitely other options. The first method is like the Red and Blue one and involves a shiny Gyarados. Basically, all you have to do is just take the Gyarados and breed it with another Pokemon in its egg group. Since shininess is determined by the parents, the odds of getting a shiny Pokemon from the parent Gyarados is about 1 in 64. The only egg groups that Gyarados is not compatible with are the Mineral, Ampharos, Human, and Undiscovered groups. There is still one more method, however, and this is the Odd Egg. The Odd Egg hatches into one of several baby Pokemon, and the odds of finding a shiny in the American version are 14%, which is crazy. The baby Pokemon chances of spawning from the egg are not evenly distributed, so using this encounter table, the 2 most common are Igglybuff and Cleffa. But it doesn't end there, as the Japanese version has a 50% chance of finding a shiny from the egg. So that's 3 different methods in one game, which is crazy. It makes sense though because shinies were a brand new mechanic, so I could see Pokemon wanting to promote it. By the way, if you enjoy this video, why not subscribe for daily Pokemon content? I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and it would really help me out. Next is Generation 3, and all 5 games in the generation, Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Fire Red, and Leaf Green, have no ways to increase the odds at all. This means the odds of finding a shiny Pokemon is still the normal 1 in 8,192. There are no guaranteed shiny Pokemon either, which really sucks. However, in the Trainer Tower in Fire Red and Leaf Green, there are shiny Pokemon that you can fight, but can't catch because they belong to other trainers. Therefore, you cannot catch them, so they shouldn't be counted as the easiest shiny Pokemon. There is one exception to this rule, however, but it's pretty messy. On the 7th island in Fire Red and Leaf Green, you can encounter Unknown. However, the shiny distribution is incredibly messy. The different numbers and letters have different odds due to the personality values. To be honest, I don't really understand how it works, so here it goes. Basically, the unknown shiny forms can range from 1 in 5,020 to 1 in 18,432. What unknown forms, may you ask? Well, it all depends on the player and their secret ID. Since the same unknown forms do not have the exact same odds in every game and the info is really complicated, this one shouldn't count at all. and my final answer is the 1 in 8,192 odds. Moving on to Generation 4, we have Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. There are no guaranteed shiny methods, but there are two ways to find unique shiny Pokemon. The first is a staple of shiny hunting that is known as the Masuda method. It's named after Junichi Masuda, who works on Pokemon. How it works is that you take one Pokemon from the same egg group and make them breed. The catch is both Pokemon have to be in different languages. This was most likely done to promote the new GTS feature, which was revolutionary and allowed people to trade and battle online for the first time in Pokemon history. You really had to be there to experience it. Anyway, the second method is a Platinum exclusive and involves an item called the Pokemon Radar. If you acquire a chain of 40 in the Shaking Grass patches, the odds of having a shiny Pokemon in your patch is 1 in 200, which is absolutely insane. Since there's a maximum of 4 grass patches, this makes the odds about 1 in 50. You start a chain by KOing random Pokemon found with the Poke Radar. These two methods are pretty easy, but out of the two I would definitely say the Poke Radar, though it requires more work to set up, but less work to execute, while the Masuda method takes less time to set up, but more time to execute, so it's really about picking your poison here. After this came the Johto remakes Heart Gold and Soul Silver. As mentioned before, the red shiny Gyarados is still in these games, and is still a guaranteed Pokemon. There is also the Masuda method as well, for those who do not count guaranteed shiny Pokemon as the easiest shiny Pokemon. Also, as a disclaimer, I got this fact from an internet forum and not an official source. I couldn't find an answer anywhere else, so please correct me if I'm wrong. After Generation 4, we start out with Generation 5, starting with Black and White. There are no guaranteed shiny Pokemon, unlike Heart Gold and Soul Silver. However, the Masuda method from the last generation returned in these games. In fact, it got a buff with the odds increasing from about 1 in 1683 to odds of 1 in 1365, which is way better in my opinion. In fact, the odds can be increased again with an item that most people are familiar with, and it was introduced in this generation. It's called the Shiny Charm. By completing the Pokédex, the base odds go up to about 1 in 2731 and increase the Masuda method odds to about 1 in 1024. Moving on to Black 2 and White 2, these games have the most guaranteed shiny Pokemon. The first one is either a Dratini or a Gible. Gible comes from defeating Bonga in the Black Tower in Black 2, and you get Dratini from defeating Bonga in White Tree Hollow in White 2. One of these is definitely better than the other. There's also another guaranteed shiny Pokemon, this time being a Haxorus. In order to get this amazing shiny, you first need to complete the original Pokédex, and then Skyla will take you to the Nature Preserve. This is where you can find shiny Haxorus in the middle of the island. This Pokemon is definitely worth completing the Pokédex. It just looks plain amazing. Now we make the jump from the DS to the 3DS, starting out with X and Y. These games introduce the new shiny odds, jumping from 1 in 8,192 to 1 in 4,096. This means that every Pokemon became easier to find shiny. However, there's still some ways to increase the odds. The first one is the Poke Radar, a returning mechanic from Platinum that was already discussed. However, the data this time isn't really clear. The odds are unknown, but what is known is that the shiny Pokemon chances of appearing increase. These games also introduce something called the Friend Safari, where you can find Pokemon that your friends have. The odds of finding a shiny here is about 1 in 819 without the shiny charm, and with the shiny charm, the odds are 1 in 585. The Masuda method makes a return, however. Due to the overall blanket odds increasing, the odds of this method also increase from about 1 in 683 without the shiny charm and about 1 in 512 with the shiny charm. This method is amazing, but there's still one more method that needs to be discussed. This one is called chain fishing. This method involves, well, fishing, and you're going to need a few things. The first is a fishing rod. The second is ideally a Pokemon with suction cups to reel in Pokemon. And the third thing is Pokeballs. Basically, you need to find the same species of Pokemon in a row to increase the odds. Once you have a chain of 20, the odds increase to 1% or about 1 in 100. In fact, the method is so amazing that with the shiny charm, the odds only increase to about 1 in 95. This is amazing, and you can get some really cool shiny Pokemon with this method. It's clear that X and Y love giving shiny Pokemon to the player, and these are the most methods of any game that we've discussed so far. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire also have something called the Dex Nav, which is pretty much like the Poke Radar. However, like X and Y, it's very complicated, and I wasn't really able to understand it. After watching a few videos, this is what I understand. The search levels increase into the several hundreds and the odds increase by 0.01 every 100 or so. The weird thing is that you get boosted odds randomly. I'm not quite sure why it exists, but hey. Also keep in mind this is for the several hundreds, so it takes several thousands to get odds of 1%. Luckily chain fishing and the Masuda method are in this game, meaning we can count them as the easiest shiny method. Because the Poke Radar and Dex Nav aren't really clear, we can just go ahead and assume that chain fishing is the easiest shiny method across all of Generation 6. This means we can move on to Generation 7 starting with Sun and Moon. The Masuda method is back in these games with the same odds as it did in Generation 6. However, there's a new method introduced in these games which can give you even easier shinies, and it's called the SOS method. How it works is that you find a Pokemon that can call for help. Once the Pokemon is called an ally 31 times, the shiny odds increase to 1 in 315 without the shiny charm and 1 in 273 with the shiny charm. An interesting note is that the chain resets after 255 encounters, but you can get the odds back after 286 encounters. This is so much easier compared to the Masuda method and is really worth the time. Moving on to Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, the SOS method is still present in this game with the exact same odds. And fun fact, the chain does not reset or break or anything like that at 255, making it much better. However, even with that buff, there is still one other method that is so much better. It's called the Ultra Wormhole. How it works is, after beating the game, you can fly through these Ultra Wormholes and hunt Pokemon that you wouldn't normally be able to get, like legendaries and other random Pokemon. There are 3 factors on how this works. It depends on how many light years you've traveled, how many rings the hole has, and if you've caught the legendary in that biome. Keep in mind, the legendaries do not have boosted odds, but the regular Pokemon do. Anyway, how it works is the further you've traveled and the more rings around the hole, and if you've caught all the legendary Pokemon, the odds can increase to about 38%, which is about 1 in 3. In fact, the odds are so good that the shiny charm does nothing to boost the odds, because they're so good already. Fun fact, this is actually how I got my first shiny, a Floatzel. I wasn't too big into shiny hunting at the time, but after getting the shiny, I became super big on shiny hunting. Now moving on to the final Generation 7 games, Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. There's only one shiny method and it works pretty well. For this method, there's really only one thing you need to do, and that is to catch the same Pokemon consecutively to build up what is known as a catch combo. Here is a table of shiny odds as you catch more and more Pokemon. In short, the more Pokemon you catch, up to 31, the better the odds are, and with a lure and shiny charm, the odds increase to about 1 in 273 for all species, not just the one that you were catching. We can now move on to Generation 8, starting off with Sword and Shield, and these games are kind of weird. I'll be counting 2 methods because one is in the DLC, and some people do not own the DLC and therefore cannot do this method. So let's start out with the people who do not own the DLC. Sword and Shield introduced a new method, but it's broken. How it works is that you catch up to 500 Pokemon of the same species for increased odds of 3%. This is very hard to do and it's pretty much broken. Due to a coding error, it doesn't work and you're stuck with the odds of about 1 in 4096 without the shiny charm and 1 in 1365 with the shiny charm. This means that Masuda method bred Pokemon are easier to do because for starters, it's not broken and the odds are the same as they are in Generation 6. But what if you have the DLC? The Isle of Armor have no guaranteed shiny Pokemon and neither do the Crown Tundra, but there is a method introduced in the Crown Tundra called Dynamax Adventures. How it works is that you and 3 other players, or NPCs depending on who you are, go and face 3 Dynamax Pokemon. At the end, there's a legendary Pokemon that you can catch. The odds of finding a shiny is 1 in 300 without the charm and 1 in 100 with the charm. These odds are amazing, but the catch is they take around 15 minutes to do, but they're fun and I enjoy doing them with my friends. After this came the worst games in the franchise, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. There are 2 methods. The first one is obviously the Masuda method, which has the exact same odds. I don't need to explain this one anymore. The second is a Poke Radar, which makes its return from Platinum. The Poke Radar functions literally the exact same way, and basically all you have to do is just encounter wild Pokemon until you find one that you like, and then you can just start building a chain, and then eventually you'll find a shiny sparkling grass patch. Moving on to the other Sinnoh game, we have Legends Arceus. There is actually a guaranteed shiny Pokemon, in this case a Ponyta, which you can do after doing a quest with the professor. However, if you do not like guaranteed shiny Pokemon, the easiest method is something called Mass Outbreaks. If the Pokemon you're hunting has a completed Pokedex entry, then the odds of finding a shiny increases. For general hunting, it doubles to about 1 in 2048. In mass outbreaks, it goes up to about 1 in 152. If you have a perfect Pokedex entry for that Pokemon, then the chance of finding the shiny goes again to about 1 in 141. Once you have the shiny charm, the chances to find a shiny Pokemon increases yet again. Since you need a perfect Pokedex entry for each Pokemon, the chances of finding a shiny Pokemon after getting the shiny charm increases to about 1 in 819. The shiny rate in mass outbreaks then becomes 1 in 137. With a perfect Pokedex entry and the shiny charm, the standard shiny rate is now about 1 in 585, and the mass outbreak rate is about 1 in 128. Basically now all you need to do is wait for, well, a mass outbreak and get the shinies. Last is Scarlet and Violet. There are several methods like the mass outbreaks and making sandwiches, but the odds pale in comparison to the Masuda method, which is at the exact same odds. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, why not subscribe to the channel for daily Pokemon content. This video took forever to make. Also follow my Twitter, which will be in the description down below. Have a great day.